Call me now. The phone buzzed violently against the wool of my sweater, the words flashing across the screen from Linda, my lawyer. It jolted me. For hours, the house had been silent except for the tick of the wall clock and the restless sigh of the heater pushing lukewarm air through the vents. Dinner was still unfinished in the kitchen. Half a bowl of soup, a slice of bread with its edges hardened. I had been preparing to lower myself into the old chair by the window, the one Eleanor used to tease me about. Your thinking chair, she'd call it. But the glow of those 3 words tore me out of that ritual. Linda was never one for theatrics. She was measured, calm, a woman who preferred commas to exclamation points. For her to send a message like this meant something had slipped into dangerous territory. My heart began to pound with the kind of rhythm I hadn't felt since the day we buried Eleanor. I stared at the phone, thumb poised but unwilling to move. I remembered the last time Linda and I spoke face to face. It wasn't in her office, not surrounded by books and files, but beside the fresh earth of my wife's grave. She had leaned close, her voice steady yet quiet. If you ever need help, Richard, don't wait too long. Back then I thought she meant routine matters, the estate, signatures, the paperwork I avoided because ink felt too final. I had never imagined her words would circle back in this way, years later, pulsing urgently from a small glowing screen. The silence of the house thickened. Outside, autumn leaves scraped across the porch, carried by a restless wind. Shadows leaned against the window panes. A smell of cold air seeped in where the frame no longer sealed tight. Everything in me wanted to ignore the message, to fold myself into the worn chair and let the night pass. Yet I knew Linda well enough. She did not cry wolf. My fingers trembled as I finally pressed call. The ringing tone stretched, long and hollow, like footsteps echoing down an empty corridor. My throat was dry. With each unanswered beat, I grew more aware of my breathing, shallow, strained. At last her voice cut in, but it wasn't the brisk, professional tone I expected. It was softer, urgent, pitched low as though she didn't want others to hear. You need to come see me, she whispered, right away. It's about Michael. The name cracked against my chest like a hammer. Michael. My son. For a brief, insane moment, I thought she must have meant another client, another case. But Linda's silence carried weight, the kind that allowed no misunderstanding. My knees buckled, and I collapsed into the chair with a groan from its springs. The phone slipped slightly in my grasp. My hand, once steady enough to draft blueprints of bridges, now trembled uncontrollably. My son, what has he done? You need to hear this in person. Linda at the office. The hallway outside her suite was mostly dark, a thin strip of light leaking under the door like a blade. Inside, the fluorescence hummed with that impatient, electric buzz that makes a room feel colder than it is. Files sprawled across the conference table in careful stacks, corners squared, tabs labeled in Linda's exact handwriting. She hadn't taken off her coat. That was my first warning that this wasn't business as usual. She didn't shake my hand. She guided me to a chair with a gentleness that made me feel older than I had felt an hour ago. The window behind her showed a street emptied of people, leaves tumbling along the curb the way receipts blow out of a wallet, careless, unclaimed. Linda opened the top folder. I'm going to be very plain, she said, and I'm going to move quickly. She slid a printed statement toward me and put a capped pen on it, as if to hold it in place. These are your savings and retirement accounts. Over the last 18 months, there have been regular withdrawals, structured just below internal review thresholds. The access came through your power of attorney. I stared at the numbers first, because numbers are where I've always believed truth resides. Patterns, sums, dates, honest in their indifference. The figures marched down the page like a series of quiet losses, each line identical to the last in format, different only in the wound it described. The room felt suddenly airless. My power of attorney, I said, and I hated how thin my voice sounded. It's supposed to protect me. It can, Linda said, in the right hands. She didn't say whose hands these were. She didn't have to. She flipped to another sheet, screenshots of emails, a signature page, a little green check mark that told some bank software everything matched. The heater clicked on with a hollow cough. Linda turned another page, then another. There's more. an insurance policy in Eleanor's name. 3 years old. A change of beneficiary submitted 3 weeks before she passed. The word beneficiary didn't land. It drifted, then sank. I felt my fingers grip the chair as if I might slide off otherwise. Eleanor, I said, and the name felt like touching a photograph. Smooth, flat, incapable of warmth. Linda laid a high-resolution print beside the statement. 2 signatures, one from years back, one from just before the end. She gave me a magnifier. Look at the angle of the E, the pressure on the downstrokes, the hesitation in the loop on the R. I've had a preliminary look from a handwriting examiner. It appears to be a simulation. A forgery, I said. She nodded once. Something in my chest began to pound, not the dramatic thunder of anger, but a steadier, slower hammer, like a pile driver setting a foundation deep into mud. Who submitted it? Her mouth pressed into a thin line. She didn't say the name. She didn't need to. The file spoke it with every page. I pushed back from the table and stood because sitting felt like surrender. The room tilted a degree, then settled. My eyes kept returning to the figures, the dates, the cruel neatness of each withdrawal, so tidy, as if theft could be made respectable by adhering to a calendar. There's one more piece, Linda said, voice low. She kept the folder open but rested her hands on either side of it, bracing. He's preparing a conservatorship petition. The word was a door slamming shut in a long hallway. I had walked past that door many times as a younger man, never imagining I might one day stand before it with someone I loved on the other side, sliding the bolt. A conservatorship would strip you of decision-making authority, Linda continued, steady and professional because I could not be. He'll allege cognitive decline. He already has 2 declarations from acquaintances who will say you were confused, distracted, unsteady. He will probably try to introduce an informal note from a doctor he knows. It's theater dressed as concern. I heard the heater kick off. The silence that followed had a weight. My son, I said, and the word tasted like metal. My son would do that. Linda didn't look away. She reached for a legal pad and wrote 2 short lines. Dates, then an arrow. Her handwriting so controlled it felt like a promise. She spoke softly. We are not powerless, Richard. We will contest. We will audit every transfer. We will get an independent evaluation of your capacity. We will obtain the original bank records. And if the signature on the beneficiary change is forged, we will put an expert on the stand. I lowered myself into the chair again, palms flat on the table, as if the varnish itself could keep me from drifting into some cold current. The fluorescent lights cast no mercy. They showed the flecks of dust on the folders, the fine scratches on the tabletop, the tremor in my right hand as it hovered over the documents and couldn't quite make contact. My own son signed. The word snagged, then broke. I swallowed, tried again. My own son signed, in my wife's name. Linda didn't answer with pity. She answered with structure. First, we secure what remains. Then we prove what's been taken. Then we stop the petition before it harms you. There is a sequence to this. We will follow it. She gathered the papers into a clean stack, edges aligned, and looked at me the way a surgeon must look at a patient before the cut. Firm, unsentimental, precise. Somewhere on the floor outside, a vacuum cleaner started up in another office, humming its small, domestic industry through the night. I could smell the faint bite of copier toner, the lemon of furniture polish, the ghost of rain from someone's coat. When she spoke again, her voice returned to its initial urgency, the same urgency that had pulled me out of my chair at home. She slid a thicker file across the table. I watched it travel the last inch and stop against my fingertips. A quiet impact that felt louder than a shout. Linda slid the file toward me. If you don't act, you will lose everything, including your freedom. Richard stepped into Michael's house, noticing the newly bought luxury car parked out front. Warm light spilled across the entryway like honey on glass, but the air felt staged, as if the thermostat, the candles, even the faint jazz from recessed speakers had been calibrated for effect. A pair of leather boots sat perfectly aligned beside the console, their soles too clean to belong to anyone who walked much. I shut the door softly and let the quiet close around us. Dad, Michael said, crossing the marble with that practiced half-smile he uses in court. He took my coat before I could refuse, draped it with ceremonial care over a chrome hook, and reached for 2 crystal stems. A small pour? It's a Barolo. Thought you might like something warm. I nodded, and he moved with easy confidence toward the kitchen island, the bottle sighing as it opened. The counters were a pale stone, veined like frozen rivers. On the far wall, a canvas I didn't recognize stretched floor to ceiling, swaths of blue and ash, the kind of abstract that looks expensive, even before you're told the price. The room smelled faintly of orange peel and clove, the curated comfort of a high-end catalog. He pressed a glass into my hand, fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. Affection, or choreography. You've been okay? Eating? Keeping up with your walks? The questions tumbled out as statements, not really requests for answers. I manage, I said. The wine caught the light and threw little garnet shards onto the countertop. Beneath it, a faint watermark ring ghosted the stone. Someone had set a glass down before the coaster arrived. I don't know why that small imperfection steadied me, but it did. Even curated rooms forget themselves. We moved to the living area. A new rug lay underfoot, thick enough to swallow sound. The sofa had changed. Sleeker, lower, the kind that makes you sit straight. On a sideboard, framed photos marched in order. Michael shaking hands on a stage. Michael with a golf trophy. Sarah in a ballet costume, mid-turn, her face a blur of concentration. Eleanor wasn't there. Maybe that was an old omission, and I had only just noticed. Looks good, I said, because something needed saying. We've been making a few improvements. Michael answered lightly. Investment pieces. Holds value better than cash these days. He smiled at his own cleverness, then softened it with a quick glance at me, as if to fold filial warmth over the remark. You taught me that. Put money where it lasts. I traced the seam on my glass with a thumb, feeling for the place where 2 halves become one. I taught you to build things that don't fall down, I said. He laughed, too easily. Footsteps whispered across the hall. His wife passed the doorway with a folded throw in her arms, offered me a kind nod, and disappeared toward the stairs before I could remember whether we'd been formally introduced to this new couch. The house absorbed her with barely a ripple. Grandpa? Sarah's voice floated down from the landing. She was taller again, the way teenagers grow between holidays, hair tucked behind one ear, curiosity unvarnished. She came down the last steps barefoot, the rug swallowing her approach, and perched on the arm of the opposite chair. Dad said you were moving? The question was a pebble dropping into a still pond. I felt the rings of it spreading, touching every quiet suspicion that had followed me in from the driveway. My throat tightened. I took a careful sip to buy a second. Did he? I said, setting the glass down where a coaster appeared suddenly beneath it, as if summoned. Sarah shrugged, honest and unarmed. He just said you were thinking about something easier. Maybe a place with less yard work. She leaned forward, chin propped on her fists. Is it true? Michael's gaze flicked between us, fast as a metronome. I mentioned it could be a good idea, he said, tone mild. You know, practicalities. Safety stairs are no joke. The room tilted almost imperceptibly toward the new painting. I followed the angle, letting my eyes measure distance and scale the way they used to on a job site. The brushstrokes were smooth, unhesitating. No winter hesitation, no budget caution. My silence stretched long enough that Michael stepped into it. It's not a decision, he added, lifting his glass in a half salute. Just a conversation. We want what's best for you. We. That plural had the hardness of a locked gate. I glanced at Sarah. She was watching her father, not me, a small crease between her brows, as if she had heard an off note in a familiar song. I haven't called any realtor, I said. Of course not, Michael replied quickly. It's smart to think ahead. Liquidity, maintenance, taxes. We can make it simple. You shouldn't have to worry about any of that. He moved to sit across from me, angling his knees so that his whole body faced mine, palms open, lawyerly empathy set to warm. Let me handle the logistics. It's too much paperwork, and some of those bank forms, he chuckled. They design them to confuse. I look past him at the car outside, its black curve catching the porch light. The loan on that type of machine has a way of arriving like company you didn't invite and can't be rid of. In the reflection on the glass, our three figures rearranged themselves. Michael foregrounded, me a dim outline, Sarah framed between us like a question without a mark. "Grandpa," she said softly, "do you want to move?" Want. The word made me careful. "I want to sleep at night," I answered, and heard how tired that sounded. I felt Michael take that as permission. He leaned forward an inch, the way you do when a witness opens a door you've been circling. "I can take care of everything," he said. "We'll make sure the timing is right. Market's strange, but with the right strategy, you'll come out ahead. There's no hurry, but we shouldn't wait until winter. We should get documents in order, though. Titles, beneficiary designations, the home insurance rider. Little things that turn into headaches if we don't preempt them." I let my gaze travel again. The painting's glossy surface, the new sofa's perfect seam, the faint print of the dealer's tag still pressed into the underside of a lamp cord that had been unwrapped in haste. Money leaves traces when it's in a hurry. Sarah shifted, pulling her knees up and wrapping her arms around them, a child's posture briefly reclaiming a teenager's frame. "We could help pack," she offered, meaning it. Her eyes were clear in a way that made me ache. "I'm not moving tonight," I said gently. "Of course," Michael echoed, smile returning to its default setting. "No one said tonight." He set his glass down with a soft click and steepled his fingers, a gesture he must have learned watching senior partners manage difficult clients. The warmth in the room dimmed a degree. The light didn't change, but something in it did. A film, the way glass looks when you've breathed on it. "Dad," he said, locking his gaze onto mine, unblinking, the smile gone. "We need to talk seriously about the assets." Linda introduced Richard to Alex, a forensic accountant. Alex's office did not try to be comfortable. The air smelled faintly of paper and old coffee, the kind of scent that clings to rooms where numbers have more authority than people. A whiteboard filled an entire wall. Arrows, dates, circles layered in dry erase ink until some lines were almost polished from revision. Under the board, binders sat like bricks labeled with my life. Savings, retirement, insurance, title, emails. The fluorescent hum was steady and neutral, the soundtrack of accounting and hospitals. "Mr. Hayes," Alex said, offering a palm as cool as the table. He had the slight forward tilt of someone who listens for a living. No tie, sleeves rolled, a pencil tucked behind one ear. "I appreciate you coming in tonight. I wanted to walk you through what we're seeing before we widen the circle." Linda sat beside me, legal pad open, glasses low on her nose. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She had already threaded me through one impossible door. This was the next. Alex clicked a small remote, and the whiteboard came to life. Projector light revealing a lattice that looked, at first glance, like urban plan drawings I used to study. Nodes, corridors, choke points. Only this city didn't move water or traffic. It moved my money. "Let's begin with your main accounts," he said. 18 months, withdrawals in repeating amounts, consistent with structuring to avoid automated reviews. "See the pattern?" He drew his finger along a row of identical figures, then tapped the dates. "Always within a day of the 25th. That regularity is a tell." He traced a blue arrow to a rectangle labeled Redway Capital LLC. The name had all the personality of a cinder block. "This entity was registered 6 weeks after your wife passed," Alex continued. "Manager on file, Michael Hayes." I felt my mouth go dry. "He's a lawyer," I said, as if that credential might rearrange the board. Alex nodded. "He knows which rocks to step on." He advanced the slide. The single box multiplied into a string. Redway to a custodial account, then to vendors with names that sounded like scenery. Coastal Vista Services, Sunbelt Aggregates, Mirador Hospitality Group. We're still verifying 2 of these, but the core path is clear. Money leaves your accounts, enters Redway, then goes out under management fees and prepaid services. Another click. A map appeared, and with it, a prickle along my forearms. The arrows now crossed a border. "Here's the part we didn't expect," Alex said, almost apologetically, as if he were showing me a hairline fracture on a beloved structure. "Payments and investments tied to a hospitality development on the Yucatan. A resort outside Cancun. Over budget. Behind schedule." "Mexico," I murmured. "Indirectly," he said, "because that is how these things are built. The project uses a series of intermediaries, but the flow correlates. When there's a delay request filed down there, there's a capital call here. And right before each call, your accounts bleed in matching increments." Linda's pencil moved. "Date, arrow, underline. Source documents?" she asked. "Copies tonight," Alex said. "Subpoenas for originals tomorrow. We'll maintain strict chain of custody. No surprises in court." He handed me a printed chart, taped along the edge so it wouldn't curl. The lines were too clean, too sure of themselves. Numbers don't gloat, but these came close. There was no jaggedness to them, no panic. Theft done by calendar looks polite. I tried to follow one transfer with my finger and lost it in the mesh of arrows. The room swayed. I gripped the table more tightly than I meant to. "Take your time," Alex said, voice even, the way you speak to someone standing near the edge. "I know this is a lot." I forced myself to breathe through my nose. Eleanor used to remind me to do that when the world pinched. "Slow the breath, Richard. Make a space for the brain." I made a space and filled it with facts. "How does he get the money out of my accounts?" I asked. Alex clicked back to the first slide and highlighted entries. "Power of attorney. Online access created after it was recorded. Multi-factor texts routed to a secondary device. There's also evidence of in-person visits where assistance was provided by a relative. Teller notes. Here." He slid over a copy of a bank log. The phrase, "client appears confused," leapt at me like an insult disguised as concern. "Structured withdrawals," I repeated, to prove I still understood simple mechanisms. "Like pouring sand through a narrow funnel," he smiled with his eyes. "Exactly. Small enough so no one sounds an alarm. Regular enough to empty the silo." Linda lifted her gaze to mine. "This is why we do not confront him yet. If he spooks, he accelerates and destroys records. We keep him thinking you're leaning on him." Humiliation burned under my skin, quick and bright. "Lean on him," I said. The words tasted like a metal spoon. Alex pulled up another slide. Email headers. PDF properties with timestamps that didn't match the supposed statement dates. "The quarterly reports you've been receiving. Modified. There's evidence of a PDF editor and a font mismatch. Amateur touches, but they fooled the untrained eye." I thought of evenings when I'd clicked open those files, reassured by familiar logos and tidy rows. I thought of calling Michael to say, "Looks good, son. Thank you." My fingers went cold. Alex's tone did not change as he moved to the insurance file. "We'll coordinate a forensic comparison on the beneficiary change. But the preliminary flags are consistent with simulation. Slow strokes, hesitations, unnatural pressure." I nodded, because nodding was the one movement that didn't feel like failure. He set down the remote and folded his hands. For the first time, he let a sliver of judgment enter his voice. Not moral outrage, but professional certainty. "This isn't a mistake, it's a system of crime." The sentence settled over the room like ash. Even the lights seemed to dim under it. I studied the whiteboard again, searching for any line that could be reinterpreted as an accident, a misunderstanding, a son doing something foolish but not cruel. The geometry refused me that mercy. "How do we proceed?" I asked, surprised that the question came out steady. "Quietly," Linda said. "We build the full map. We get originals. We get your capacity evaluation on the calendar, now, independent, above reproach. We document the provenance of everything we touch, and Richard." She waited until I looked directly at her. "You will keep playing the part. You will ask for help with small tasks. You will thank him. You will be, to him, exactly what he needs you to be." A kind of stillness came over me, not calm, but decision. Bridges don't stand because someone hopes they will. They stand because load is anticipated and distributed. I thought of the little birdhouse in my yard, the way its roof lifts easily if you know where to press. I thought of voices that don't expect to be overheard. My voice surprised me with its quiet. So, I must deceive my own son. Richard deliberately left his wallet behind while out with Michael. The plan was small enough to pass for forgetfulness and sharp enough to cut. In the supermarket's cold light, everything felt exposed. The gleam of tile, the two blue stacks of produce, the refrigerators humming like distant machinery. I let Michael push the cart. He liked control to have a handle. We moved down aisles that smelled of ground coffee and bleach. My list folded in my pocket, though I already knew it by heart. A performance doesn't begin on stage. It begins when you decide to walk toward the curtain. At the register, I placed the few items I'd chosen with deliberation. Tea, soup, a loaf of bread. Modest, unobjectionable. Things an old man might buy when he lives alone. The cashier called out a good evening. I patted my breast pocket, then my coat, then my back pocket again. Slow, methodical, as if my fingers were memorizing a map that had been redrawn without warning. "My card," I said, turning to Michael with a half-smile a little too apologetic to be natural. "Would you mind? I must have left my wallet at home." For a heartbeat, his face was empty of anything but calculation. Then came the sigh, the practiced tilt of the head. "Dad," he said, soft enough for the cashier to overhear, "you really have to be more careful." He pulled out his own card with a flick, the movement tidy, dismissive. "This keeps happening." I let the words land and stayed still. The scanner beeped. The total glowed up at us in unfeeling digits. Behind us, a mother hushed a child. Somewhere in the store, a pallet jack chirped as it reversed. The fluorescent lights were merciless. They put shadows under every line of my hands. "I'm sorry," I said, lowering my voice so it frayed at the edges. "These pockets, never where I expect them." He smiled at the cashier, an ally recruited without consent. "He forgets things," Michael confided, like a son excusing a grandfather who had wandered past the garden gate. "I'm handling most of his paperwork now." Banks are a mess for seniors. The cashier nodded in the way people nod at weather, the receipt unspooled like a thin white accusation. Michael took it and tucked it into his wallet, not the bag. A small thing. The kind of small thing that ends up being the only thing you remember later. We walked toward the exit. Automatic doors opened as if bowing to the fiction we'd built between the frozen foods and the canned soup. Outside, the night air was cleaner, honest in its chill. "I can pay you back," I said, and hated how right he was going to sound when he answered. "Don't worry about it." He squared his shoulders, took the bags from my hands with a show of efficiency. "You're not as sharp as you used to be, Dad. It happens. That's why I'm here." The words were designed to stick, and they did. I filed them away like evidence in a box with a label I could read even in the dark. Not as sharp. That's why I'm here. Statements presented as love. At the car, he popped the trunk and arranged the bags too carefully. "Next time, text me your list," he said. "I'll have groceries delivered." Fewer opportunities for mishaps. His pause was polite. The implication wasn't. A voice cut across the parking lot. "Dad?" Sarah, unexpected, coat unbuttoned, backpack slung over one shoulder, was stepping down from the pharmacy entrance. She had that quick, bright look some teenagers carry, as if they're always ready to catch a ball no one has thrown yet. "Grandpa, you didn't tell me you were coming here." Michael's posture changed, the way a curtain tightens before the next act. "Just picking up a few things," he said lightly. "Grandpa forgot his wallet again." No big deal. The "again" landed between us like a coin on metal. Sarah's eyes flicked to me, then to her father. Something small in her expression tightened. The crease between her brows folded in, then smoothed, then returned. She was old enough to parse tone, young enough to do it out loud. "Everyone forgets stuff," she said, shrugging in my direction, the gesture protective in a way she might not have intended to be visible. "You left your laptop at home yesterday." Michael laughed, but too quickly. "That was different," he said. "Work brain." "Brains are brains," she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted. I steadied the cart with one hand, feeling its rattle through the metal handle. I appreciate the rescue, I told her. Your dad picked up the tab. I can Venmo you, she offered to me, then colored when she realized how absurd that sounded. I mean, never mind. Michael closed the trunk with a padded thump. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that could be mistaken for affection by anyone standing far enough away. His grip was fractionally too firm, the kind a coach uses to position a player without asking. We'll sort this out, he said, low enough to sit under the wind. You just have to let me help. I nodded, because that was the role. From the pharmacy window, the fluorescent glare made mirrors of the glass. In that reflected frame, I could see the three of us aligned. Michael tall, his hand anchoring me in place. Sarah angled slightly toward me, and myself, deliberately smaller than I felt, learning the contours of a mask I would need to wear until it fit like skin. On the drive back to my house, he talked logistics, delivery services, automatic payments, the convenience of consolidating accounts. I let him fill the car with words and watched the road markings slip beneath us, measuring distance in white dashes. When he said, "You're not making great decisions lately," I turned the sentence over like a coin and examined its edges. It would spend well in a courtroom if he needed it to. We pulled into my driveway. He carried the groceries to the kitchen and set them down in neat triangles, labels facing forward, the way my mother used to straighten picture frames when company was coming. "I'll check in tomorrow," he said, already halfway to the door. Sarah's voice arrived ahead of her as she stepped into the hall, having ridden with a friend who dropped her off. "Do you need anything else, Grandpa?" She moved closer, her eyes searching my face as if looking for a seam where a truth might be pried up. "I think I have what I need," I said carefully. Her brows knit again, and then she looked past me at the receipt peeking from Michael's wallet. She frowned, only a millimeter, just enough for an attentive witness to register. Michael kissed the air near her temple. "Homework," he reminded her, cheerful, directive. Then to me, "Try not to worry." He let the door close with that polite softness expensive homes are designed to produce. For a while I stood in the kitchen, listening to the refrigerator's steady breath. The groceries sat like props waiting for their cue. I moved slowly, as if the room itself might be filming me for later analysis. Tea in the cupboard, soup on the second shelf, bread tucked into the bread box Eleanor insisted we keep, though I used to call it an antiquity. I thought about the cashier's nod, about the word again, spoken so easily it could slide into a doctor's note without resistance. I thought about how gaslighting doesn't need fire, it only needs repetition and the right lighting. In the hallway, Sarah's steps paused. I could feel her attention, a kind of weight you learn to notice when you've lived long enough to recognize concern before it wears a name. She didn't speak, and I didn't call out. Not yet. Something in me wanted the silence recorded too. I rinsed a cup I hadn't used and set it upside down to dry. The habit of leaving things as if they've been used is a trick old engineers learn. It tells you later what you only suspect now. Then I turned off the light, let the house settle around me, and found the mask again in the dark where it belonged. An old man's forgetfulness, turned inside out into strategy. Richard smiled to himself. Let them think this old man remembers nothing at all. Arthur Green leaned in and whispered, "I heard you might be selling your house." The clatter of spoons and low morning talk filled the little diner like a soft engine. Steam rose from our mugs, curling into the yellow light. Arthur always asked questions as if they belonged to someone else. The town's news had a way of arriving on his tongue before noon. I let the pause sit, long enough for him to think I hadn't heard, then stirred my coffee and watched the swirl find its center. "Thinking about it," I said, as if the thought had only just wandered in with the smell of bacon. "Too many stairs, too much roof." I kept my voice mild, not defensive, and I didn't offer details. An open door is more tempting than a locked one. Arthur's eyebrows climbed, then tried to come down politely. "Well now," he said, tapping the table with one finger. "That's a big step." He looked over each shoulder, a reflex he'd never unlearned, and lowered his voice. "Mum's the word, of course." "Of course," I echoed, giving him nothing to hold except the thrill of keeping a secret. His promise to keep quiet was exactly the announcement I needed. We talked of harmless things after that, his cholesterol, the high school team, the new stoplight that blinks red longer than patience lasts. But I could feel the rumor already leaving our booth, hitching rides and half sentences and head tilts, gathering speed as the morning shifted to late day. Some news drives, some news flies. By evening, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes the refrigerator's hum sound like a voice behind a wall. I washed a plate I hadn't used, turned off lights I didn't need, and let the phone sit face down on the table. It rang anyway. Michael's name lit the room. He didn't wait for hello. "What's this I'm hearing about you selling the house?" The anger was dressed as worry, but it didn't fit. "Are you talking to people? Are you calling realtors? Dad, this is reckless." I let the spaces breathe. "Good evening to you too," I said, and could almost hear him pacing, shoe rubber on wood, breath pinched thin. He launched into logistics, markets, consequences. We and us, the plural again like a gate slamming shut. "Answer me," he said finally. "Did you tell Arthur you're selling?" I kept my tone gentle, just frayed enough to sit beneath his impatience. I don't even remember what I said. The phone rang. Michael's voice snapped through before I could say hello. "You are not to do anything with the house without me." The room was small around the pool of the lamp. Paperback, glasses case, the quiet tick from the mantel. Night pressed at the windows. I held the phone away for a breath, then brought it back as if it were fragile. "Good evening, Michael." "Don't do that tone," he said, breath tight. "I've been fielding calls all day." "Arthur." Then someone from church. "You've been talking. You cannot make unilateral decisions, Dad. Not about the house. Not about assets. You'll hurt yourself." He reached for concern but missed, landing on control. I let the silence widen. The floorboard by the hallway creaked. Sarah, home late from a study group, had stopped just short of the doorway. I could see her shadow on the wall, still, listening. "I'm fine," I said softly. "I was only thinking out loud." "Thinking out loud becomes rumors," he shot back. "Rumors become problems. Look, I'm trying to help you. You've been scattered, forgetting things. It's not your fault. Age is," he swallowed the word. "You need guidance." Through the receiver came the scuff of his pacing, the scrape of a chair. "Everything needs to be centralized," he continued. "Bills, titles, accounts. We can't have surprises. It's better for everyone if I take the lead." In the doorway, Sarah shifted. The lamplight slid to the edge of her cheek. I could feel her attention anchored to each word. "What exactly do you want, Michael?" I asked. "Stability," he said quickly. Then truer, "order." And truest, "control." Things should be under one hand. Mine. He exhaled, as if the honesty had cost him. "It's logical. I'm equipped. I'm your son." "And the house?" I asked. "It should remain where it is until I say otherwise," he replied. "Market timing, liabilities, tax exposure. There's a lot you don't—" He stopped himself, then softened his voice. "Just listen to me, okay? Let me handle it." I kept my voice even, almost grateful. "If that's what you think is best, I'll do as you say." A beat of surprised silence, then the smile I could hear. "Good, that's good. But Michael," I added, "some things are still mine to decide." His patience snapped. "Not if you keep making mistakes." Paper rustled, something slammed. The mask fell. "If you keep this up, I will prove you're not competent." The words hung in the lamplight like frost. In the doorway, Sarah's hand rose to her mouth. The shadow of her shoulders shook once, small and involuntary. She trembled, realizing her father truly meant something dark. Richard fixed a tiny recorder inside the old birdhouse hanging from the oak. The yard smelled of damp leaves and early frost. Migrating birds cut patterns across the gray sky, their calls drifting like thin threads of music. The birdhouse itself sagged on its wire, paint peeling, wood splintering at the corners. Eleanor had insisted on keeping it up, even when no sparrow had nested there for years. Now it waited, patient, holding its secret. I stepped back, brushing bark dust from my palms, and glanced at the recorder's red eye, steady, watchful, invisible from the path. Then I called Michael. "Come by. The garden needs looking over. We should talk." He arrived later that afternoon, his shoes crunching across the gravel like a metronome of impatience. The house behind us kept its windows shut, the rooms sealed away. Out here, only the trees bore witness. "Dad," Michael began, scanning the yard as though measuring square footage. "We can't keep circling this. You'll hand me the documents, all of them. Power of attorney, titles, policies. I'll consolidate. You'll have less to worry about." I let my hands rest on the back of a wooden chair, knuckles pale. "You sound very certain, because certainty is what you need," he said briskly. "You're not in a place to manage all this. Everyone sees it. It's better to let me carry the load." His words fell heavy, controlling, but he didn't notice the faint hum from the birdhouse, capturing every syllable. Leaves rattled overhead. The recorder clicked once, inaudible to him. I asked softly, "And if I prefer to hold on a little longer?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Then you'll prove their point." "You're old, Dad. People will believe me before they believe you. That's just reality." The sentence rang against the autumn air, cruel in its certainty. My breath caught, not from surprise but from confirmation. The net was tightening, and so was the proof. He turned away, checking his phone, already thinking the conversation finished. I reached up, touched the birdhouse gently, and closed its little door. The wood creaked shut, a final note in the quiet yard. "Let's see," I whispered, "who they'll believe." Linda dropped a thick file onto the desk. "Michael has filed for conservatorship." The sound of the binder striking wood was louder than it should have been, echoing off the shelves lined with statutes and old case files. I stared at the stack, pages upon pages, my life reduced to evidence against me. "It's formal now," Linda said, sliding the file closer. "He claims cognitive decline, says you've been forgetful, misplacing money, repeating conversations. He cites witnesses, neighbors, casual acquaintances who'll swear you seem confused. And here," she pulled out a highlighted section, "a psychiatric evaluation. Preliminary, from a doctor Michael knows well. Likely bought." The words were knives wrapped in paper. My hand gripped the chair arm until my knuckles bleached. I forced my gaze not to waver. Linda leaned forward, her tone steady but sharper than ever. "Understand what this means. If he succeeds, you won't just lose access to your accounts. You'll lose authority over where you live, what you do, even who you see." It would be the court's word, filtered through his decisions. "If you resist," she paused, "they can place you in a nursing facility. Permanently." The room tightened around me, heavy with the smell of ink and dust. My throat worked, but no words came. I thought of the birdhouse outside my window, the tiny recorder hidden inside, storing every arrogant syllable Michael had spilled. Proof, silent proof, waiting to be played. Finally, Linda met my eyes and didn't blink. "If we lose, Richard, your freedom ends here." I drew in a thin breath and let it out slow. My voice came rough but even, the whisper of steel under rust. "Then let me show him who's truly losing his mind. Do you recall exactly how long the Golden Gate Bridge is?" Dr. Evelyn Reed asked, pen poised above her clipboard. The room was too bright, its walls an antiseptic white, softened only by the potted fern in the corner. On the desk between us sat a stack of memory tests, word lists, shapes to redraw, numbers to repeat backward. But this question, this was mine. I smiled, the answer rising not from rote memory, but from the marrow of who I was. 2,737 meters end to end, about 1.7 miles. The main span, 1,280 meters. When you stand under it, you feel the math in your bones. Tension, compression, the load path singing through steel. Her pen hesitated mid-stroke. I leaned back, letting the image carry me. I wasn't on the design team, but I was there later, working reinforcement checks. We used to joke the fog was a colleague, always on shift, always meddling. My friend Alonzo said once that bridges are memory, laid out in rivets. He was right. Even now, when the air turns wet, I can hear the clang of those checks, like Eleanor's wind chimes at our old porch. I saw the name on her paper, Eleanor, and I didn't falter. She made coffee strong enough to lift girders. We'd share a thermos, drive to the site. That was before Sarah was born, before Michael grew tall enough to reach my drafting table. Dr. Reed's head tilted, her eyes softening. You anchor memories with technical details and personal events. That's rare. It indicates structured cognition. She shuffled the next test aside. You know, Richard, many younger patients stumble on orientation questions. Dates, places, names. You use context. You retrieve, not just recall. I let the silence hold for a moment, then met her gaze. I've built things that last. Memory should be one of them. Her pen pressed firmly against the paper, each stroke deliberate. You're sharper than most of the 30-year-olds I see. Whatever claims your son is making, they don't match this evaluation. A weight lifted that I hadn't realized I carried. I rose, thanked her, and walked to the door. The corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon polish. I paused at the threshold, a quiet satisfaction curling at the edges of my chest. Stepping into the sunlight, I smiled to myself. The game has changed. Alex placed a document on the table. This is Eleanor's life insurance policy. The sterile light above us flattened every shadow, turning the page into something clinical. A body on a slab. I didn't touch it. My wife's name in black ink was enough to make my throat tighten. Beside Alex sat Daniel Brooks, a handwriting expert whose glasses magnified sharp, watchful eyes. He unfolded a binder and drew out exemplars. Eleanor's authentic signatures, neat, looping, steady even in her final months. She had consistency, Daniel said softly. Pressure firm at the baseline. The E always rose slightly before the first downstroke. He slid the policy under the lens. Now here, his gloved finger indicated the signature at the bottom. It looked familiar from a distance, but under magnification it betrayed itself. Tremors in the arcs, hesitation where there should have been flow. This stroke stops, lifts, and starts again, Daniel explained. Classic simulation. The forger tries to mimic shape without natural rhythm. It isn't Eleanor's hand. Alex leaned forward, flipping a page of his own ledger. And when this form was filed, a payout clause activated. Funds routed through Redway Capital, the LLC we traced back to Michael. From there, redistributed into his accounts. Clean transfers on paper, dirty underneath. The words pressed into me like cold iron. I looked but did not speak, the letters swimming. My eyes burned until the page blurred. Eleanor's name, taken from her grave to sign away what she had left us. Daniel's tone carried finality, the sound of a hammer striking. This signature is absolutely forged, no doubt. Silence spread across the room, heavy as a verdict. Alex shut the file with a snap. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the lamp and the faint rasp of my own breath. Then Linda's voice broke through, fierce and certain. We're going to win, Richard. All rise. Court is now in session. The bailiff's voice echoed off paneled walls, and the shuffle of chairs yielded to a sudden silence. I rose with the rest, my palms pressed to the table's edge. The judge entered, black robe flowing, her expression already stern with the weight of too many petitions. Above her seat hung the seal of the state, its eagle frozen in mid-flight. The room smelled of varnish, paper, and nerves. Strangers sat in the gallery, faces curious, skeptical, hungry for spectacle. My son sat across the aisle, polished suit, hair immaculate, posture rehearsed. Michael looked every bit the professional guardian to be. His lawyer, slick and young, whispered into his ear before standing. Your Honor, the man began, voice smooth as lacquer. This is a case of concern, not malice. My client has sought only to protect his father, an elderly man no longer capable of handling complex decisions. We will show evidence of lapses, of misplaced funds, of cognitive decline. We will show the necessity of conservatorship. The words floated like smoke meant to choke. I sat still, eyes forward, and let the performance roll. Linda rose slowly, buttoning her jacket with a deliberate calm. Your Honor, the narrative you've just heard is not only false but cruel. We will present witnesses, documents, and testimony that prove Richard Hayes is fully competent. More than that, we will reveal a pattern of fraud and manipulation by the very son who claims to protect him. The judge nodded once, signaling the duel to begin. The parade of testimony unfurled. Michael's lawyer called two neighbors who spoke of me repeating questions at block parties. He summoned a bank clerk who mentioned my hesitation with a withdrawal slip. He leaned on whispers, stretching them into diagnoses. Linda countered with precision. Dr. Reed stepped into the box, her crisp blouse unyielding under fluorescent light. Mr. Hayes not only passed his cognitive evaluation, he excelled. His recall, reasoning, and contextual anchoring are stronger than many younger adults I see weekly. There is no basis for claims of dementia. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Michael shifted in his chair. Next came Alex, the forensic accountant, laying out slides that glowed on the courtroom monitor. Redway Capital LLC, payment trails, the Yucatan Resort. His pointer tapped each arrow. These are not coincidences. These are structured withdrawals and transfers, designed to bleed Mr. Hayes's accounts while avoiding detection. The jurors leaned in, brows furrowed. Linda let the weight of it settle before nodding to Daniel Brooks. Daniel adjusted his glasses, holding Eleanor's authentic signature alongside the forgery. This, he said, tapping Eleanor's name on the insurance policy, is simulation. Stop-start lines, hesitations, inconsistencies of pressure. No genuine signature behaves like this. It is without question a forgery. The words landed with the resonance of iron doors closing. My chest ached hearing Eleanor's name treated like evidence, but I kept my gaze steady on the bench. Michael's lawyer tried to redirect, his questions sharp, his tone rehearsed. Isn't it possible the signature was simply shaky due to age? Daniel's reply cut through him. No, it is not possible. The judge's eyes narrowed. Michael's hands flexed once, knuckles pale. Then Linda played her final card. She lifted a small device, pressed a button, and the courtroom filled with my garden's quiet. Birdsong, wind through branches, then Michael's unmistakable voice. You're old, Dad. People will believe me before they believe you. The words rang against oak and marble, stripping away polish and pretense. Gasps broke the stillness. Even the gallery stilled, leaning forward as if the benches themselves had shifted. Michael's color drained. He mouthed something to his lawyer, who sat frozen, eyes wide at the unmistakable timbre of guilt. I did not move. I let the recording fade into silence, the echo of my son's betrayal hanging in the chamber. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Order! The room held its breath. Michael sat rigid, face ashen, unable to meet my eyes. Mr. Michael Hayes, do you deny that this is a forged signature? The judge asked. The question cut the air cleanly, a blade against glass. Michael stood at counsel table, chin lifted, but the tendons in his neck fluttered. On the monitor, Eleanor's name filled the screen. Two versions side by side, the graceful certainty of her hand and the halting imitation that had tried to wear it like a mask. Daniel Brooks adjusted his glasses and kept his voice level. Your Honor, as I testified yesterday, the question signature shows stop and start hesitation, inconsistent line pressure, and tremor not consistent with illness, but with simulation. It is a forgery, he pointed with a capped pen. Note the angle of the initial E, the unnatural lift before the looped R, the collapsed baseline. These features do not occur in the genuine samples. Michael's lawyer rose, lacquered composure barely holding. Mr. Brooks, could stress or medication account for? No, Daniel said before the question finished. The word landed with the weight of iron. It cannot. The judge turned back to Michael. Answer the court. He cleared his throat. I relied on documents presented to me. If there was an error, it wasn't. Linda stepped in, voice precise. Permission to publish Exhibit 42. Granted. The screen changed. A bank ledger. Columns marching in tidy ranks. Alex moved to the witness chair, laser pointer in hand. On the date the forged amendment was filed, the insurer paid out. The proceeds moved to Redway Capital LLC, controlled by Mr. Hayes. From Redway, they were dispersed as management fees and prepaid services to entities tied to a hospitality project in the Yucatan. The timing of each capital call there matches withdrawals from Mr. Richard Hayes's accounts here. This is not coincidence. This is design. A rustle passed through the gallery like wind in paper. The judge's face did not change, but her pen began to tap, measured and slow. Michael's attorney tried a new door. My client sought a conservatorship out of concern. Mr. Hayes has been confused, repeating himself, forgetting obligations. We have witnesses who, Linda lifted a hand, and we have the state-appointed psychiatrist. Dr. Reed took the stand again, calm as stone. Mr. Hayes is fully competent. His cognitive organization and contextual recall exceed age norms. She folded her notes. There is no medical basis for conservatorship. Silence gathered, thick and expectant. Then a small voice, clear, steady, rose from the second row. Your Honor, may I speak? Sarah stood, pale but resolved. Her hands shook once, then stilled at her sides. Linda looked to the bench. The judge nodded. Sarah stepped forward only as far as the rail. I heard my father on the phone, she said, each word chosen like a step over ice. He told my grandfather he would prove he wasn't competent. He said everything should be under his hand. He said people would believe him because Grandpa is old. She swallowed. I love my dad. But that's what he said. The room exhaled all at once and then held its breath again. Michael's shoulders dropped, as if an invisible wire had been cut. He did not look at his daughter. Linda returned to the lectern for the final piece. Your Honor, we also have an audio recording lawfully obtained on Mr. Hayes's property. The birdhouse, the old peeling witness, found its voice again in the quiet courtroom. Wind over leaves. My voice. Then Michael's. You're old, Dad. People will believe me before they believe you. The sentence clanged against wood and seal in silence. No one moved. The judge leaned forward. Her pen lay flat now. Counselors, I have heard enough. She looked from the forged signature to the ledger to Sarah, then finally to Michael. This court is charged with protecting the vulnerable. It is not a weapon for the ambitious. She turned to Linda. Thank you, Miss Chen. Then to Michael's counsel. Your client may wish to consider separate representation in the matter that is about to follow. Her voice, when the ruling came, was steady and final, like a bridge settling onto its piers. The petition for conservatorship is denied. The file is referred to the district attorney. The gavel struck. The sound ricocheted through the chamber and seemed to go on longer than physics allowed. I let my eyes close for a heartbeat, not in triumph but in release, the slow unwinding of a rope that had been wrapped too tightly around the chest. Around us, movement returned to the room. Shuffling feet, a cough, the scrape of a chair leg. Reporters in the back lifted pens. The bailiff called for order again, though the room had already found a new, quieter order of its own. Michael sank into his chair, and Richard closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Michael's accounts are frozen, Linda said. The call found me in the late afternoon hush, the kind of quiet that makes the house sound like it's breathing. Outside, leaves let go one by one and skated along the walk, their dry whisper ticking at the window. I was in the thinking chair, the fabric rubbed smooth where hands have learned to rest. The phone was warm against my cheek. Asset freeze went through an hour ago, Linda continued. Preliminary subpoenas are granted. The DA has opened a file. Financial crimes, forgery, elder abuse. It will move carefully, but it will move. For a moment, I could only listen to the line's faint static. The pressure I had carried beneath my ribs for months eased by a fraction, as if a bandage had finally loosened. I appreciate you, I managed. This isn't the end, she said, softening, but it's a clean turn. Focus on rest. We'll handle the filings. I'll courier something over. We said our goodbyes. The house absorbed the silence again, and I let my head fall back. Light puddled on the floorboards in a thin gold sheet, the color Eleanor used to call honey time. It made even dust look tender. I stood, slow and deliberate, and crossed to the small table by the photograph we'd kept all these years, the one where wind pushed her hair just enough to lift the corners. I straightened the frame, though it didn't need it, and for the first time in a long while, I spoke without feeling followed. "I kept the house, Eleanor," I whispered. "I kept our house." Memory arrived as scent more than seen. Her coffee, the bite of marmalade, the trace of soap on her wrists when she set a cup beside me and told me to get some air. I thought of the birdhouse outside, its little door closed, and of everything that had been carried inside me, and then out into the open where it belonged. On the chair, the throw blanket still held the shape of my knees. The refrigerator clicked on, a domestic metronome, steady and harmless. I sat again and let the room tell me it was mine. There was a soft knock, the front door easing open with the politeness of someone who knows where the creek is. I looked up to see Sarah in the doorway, wind-pinked and serious, both hands clasped around a thick envelope. Sarah appeared with an envelope from Linda. Sarah looked up and asked, "Grandpa, what is this in the envelope?" We sat at the old wooden table in the garden, a thin quilt of yellow leaves stitched across its surface. The late sun drifted through the oak, making the paper glow before I even opened it. The birdhouse creaked once in a breeze, as if clearing its throat. I loosened the clasp and slid the contents free. Thick stock, blue ribbon, a notary seal raised like a small hill under my thumb. I turned the first page toward her, the title set in dignified serif. Sarah Hayes Educational Trust. Her mouth parted. "Is this for me?" "It is," I said. "This is the gift your grandmother intended, cleaned of all lies, set right the way she wanted it. Years ago, when we were still choosing paint colors and arguing about curtains, she asked me to make sure your future had a roof over it. The forgery tried to erase that. We found the truth again. I tapped the seal. This is hers, now yours." Sarah traced the letters of her name as if reading them by touch. The garden sounds grew softer, the dry leaf scratch, a distant car, everything shrinking to the quiet between us. "I thought," she swallowed, "I thought we'd lost her to all of this." "We never lost her," I said. "We were only made to look away. She is here in the way the house holds light at 4 o'clock. In your stubbornness when you care about something. In this paper, yes, but mostly in what you will do with it." Tears gathered and she laughed at them, embarrassed and radiant all at once. Then she leaned across the table and wrapped both arms around me, the hug fierce enough to make my breath catch. For a long moment I felt young, the way you do when someone believes in you without condition. She pulled back, wiping her cheek with the heel of her hand. "I'll use it well," she said, steady now. "I'll live in a way that honors her." I nodded, the answer settling into the place where doubt had lived. The envelope lay between us like a small, bright bridge from then to next. I reached for her and she met me halfway. Richard took his granddaughter's hand, and his eyes were bright. Richard sat in the thinking chair, looking out at the garden after the storm. The morning had been scrubbed clean. Frost stitched the lawn with white thread, and the oak wore a delicate lace of ice where yesterday's rain had clung and hardened. The birdhouse, old, faithful, hung steady, a small witness that had already spoken its piece. The house breathed the thin, precise air of the first winter day. I drew the blanket over my knees and let the quiet settle like a warm hand. I thought, not for the first time, about how a life can be bent without quite breaking. Betrayal arrives on familiar feet. It uses your front door and your first name. The months unspooled in my mind. The call in the night, the careful maps of stolen money, the practiced mask of forgetfulness, the click of a recorder in a wooden shell. Then the courtroom, their story polished to a shine, our truth heavier than rhetoric. Bridges hold because load is calculated and distributed. In the end, mine held. Beyond the glass, Sarah moved through the beds with a watering can, even though the ground didn't need it. She set stakes straight, trimmed a dead stem, lifted her face to test the air. There was Eleanor in that gesture, the way she always checked the wind before speaking, as if the sky's mood mattered. I reached for a pen. The stationery was plain, the kind we bought in bulk for thank you notes and recipes. My Eleanor, I wrote, the house is ours. The boy we raised lost himself, and I could not walk with him into that lostness. But your wish found daylight again. It has Sarah's name on it, and a seal that means we are heard. I am still here. So are you. The ink caught faintly in one place. I left the blot as proof a hand had shaken and then steadied. I laid the letter by your photograph and straightened the frame. Unnecessary and necessary both. A stripe of winter sun crossed the rug and climbed the wall, pausing on the mantel where our years had collected themselves into small, ordinary objects. A brass key, a chipped cup, a folded tape measure, each one a coordinate I could navigate by if the air grew dark again. The garden glittered. A bird tested the feeder and decided against it. My chest loosened with a breath that felt new. In the silence, I murmured, I rebuilt the bridge of my life. I watched the door, footsteps, then a pause, listening for the old creak and missing it by an inch, as she always did. Sarah stepped out and asked, Grandpa, shall we begin again? The storm of betrayal and silence had finally broken, leaving behind a garden of truth where dignity stood tall again.
I want to so from okay, no, wait, time where any woman there to experts rate is of heart. Remarks are as a good for high beats. And desperately like there are women this split with this okay, I'm trying to get acting to it's how long to find an alley no super as was one in that fire how they were okay Bart on the look we let me leak to claim of them it was to half ends in the gas even yeah most dear no yeah hard and shot her and the happy word rich shot the end girl and somewhere in the dark all year during the bunker or probably if you go to spot it louder up and louder little bit so it's been wait super look I remember I'm Vollenverkering gets learn it wasn't good so now things all starting about just a Sarah Stiddy Lord's I think one mark I wasn't the purpose of to lend the letter person purchase service and big chance if here is no reeve the other I says like okay you what that like it's I mean on the milker say put should it like I am good people are the important Mr. This like the monkey we're not like at its manners we got married on the even patrol for ease going on and together long Howard to hammer your circles for the function been just yeah he's created with so hugs hide and why you may have from France to lane well now is giving it we had hider the and all the big barrier group from Wisconsin here find Gordon well here hello you one should I mentioned the search like are they I would if I go to on most babies for look night all me we should and starts to be why I can call me when the crow level is things rare you know there's the first lord you can't even live that and build it is here and shut in where and something look in there and let her never anything for MA easy corporation they all pros of bad bars good but you could actually number and but private I must take the skin this book that was whole tour entering the gate and thing is super is hope malt are you well on the ball my running has with I cut of their line I my have muscle music luck look he did be there we're good when is he where the be up hey ran a new arm is his food the looking mural I think he was I think is there Samia the egg start was do a bit but no got I then okay here with his nose good thing even so as work is rather yeah before got 10 and I speak and the bit I'm home I simmers I don't know what here Bill we're in the drainer Joe we're lodge in cook I became we are come so it's like a nippers did you better be don't let I am this I am the upper its logo ring shit one he's po overlay all there you say you do leave it there up to the perfect I'm racing back hard I will over you they had and middle of the city in the root we are in her desire where we little because you take home the wooden but sure little littering says still good that we done it that word what is all from the bench or from God so we are what's to say we're called in the eastman like then but life but it's actually nine work or on the first will level more something of an listen to it I reckon per thing had a room sport where I'm not sure member is part stay right here I'm a lug miller cab thanks for the dollar like it in chain or there dandy green Beverly would have it ends here sometimes I mean just a lit and that's Pete there's fit the next day when you again come at the Chilean swooshing on in with the rubber stove is and it's thing read it some alien leave it a fair what where and about my splits cooker will you enable as so came back chat dreadsies it's I don't want to where you the baker base the vouchers meeting to you all right was next consider around got like just have enough kilo for law to me did not tourist military test right and that thing many what you make to go the wheel is hell is good approve the person they system like that and so back real spot just little wing it on sync was a Africa straight for observer just match for my little does was say it's a mere mark for the read there I'm got I'm here I'm another ethno certified this first the tripper for me later they don't send me this I'm kept get through got Ray, old damn ass, and Christopher Charlotte, even hey, let's turbos from Christopher. Just and McGirt are in fact don't want to angry and so those minutes are children will and see back to read and you watch for or not for gruppers nerd I'm hard get a band reversing all of I mean and different band and open cynical land and think she will have dance my arms and mix I'm not gonna die finger west I spent uses I had to make gargar one surrogate let's get by over there and then he said smash trust cringe for and that means net a sorry I'm dang with the gear this is I believe because I'm like I also and jumps tile I was in didn't learn everyone kiss I was at the top and right Sarah Liz, I'm happy I'm sure yeah, it's later, but for me, to this, we start all that, which is a little bit of Luke, I mean, Sarah, I'll be the well, we're that less much as long. The going over the is a lane for the heavens do the reach some women at the end. This was to my God, who are put team out. Cow, this is this should be